a very warm welcome. Good afternoon. My name's Ed. I'm the host this afternoon for our webinar entitled Managing Burnout in a BANI World. Before I introduce my panel here this afternoon, just some gentle housekeeping. We do want to hear from you. Clearly, it's a webinar, but we're here to have a conversation around managing burnout in a BANI world. So how are we going to do that? There's going to be a couple of polls, so we'll love to hear from you on those. There's the chat function as well, so do throw things into chat, and we'll prompt you when we possibly want to hear some of that. But there is that Q&A function as well, and there will be a dedicated session for Q&A towards the back end of this webinar as well. So we look forward to receiving some of those questions from you. Feel free to take notes this afternoon, or if you'll just sit back and listen and engage, that's great too. On completion of this webinar, what's going to happen about a week down the line, we are going to be sharing a paper that includes most of the salient points that we're covering this afternoon. So you'll have those as a digital document, and we'll also be sharing a recording of the session as well, so you can review that at your leisure. So a couple of ways of just recapping the main points we're gonna cover. Okay, let's get into the session. So first of all, we've got Jenny and Claire joining us. Jenny, would you like to introduce yourselves, please?
Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be here, delighted to be partnering with LHH. I represent the resilience dynamic. We are kind of resilience nutters. We are researchers, practitioners, and our job is to enable organizations to support you building your own capability. We're particularly proud of our data-led approach and delighted to bring that alongside my colleagues in LHH today. So look forward to your questions and a really great conversation this afternoon. Thank you.
Awesome. Jenny, thanks so much, and thanks for giving up your time this afternoon. And I'm also joined by my colleague, Claire. Claire, do you want to say a few words?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Claire Chalmers, and I'm a principal consultant working alongside Ed here at LHH. And as the background suggests, we help leaders and managers prepare for whatever's coming next. And I'm here to really talk about group coaching in the context of resilience. So look forward to having that conversation with you this afternoon.
Thanks very much, both. And myself, Ed Chaxfield, Senior Principal Consultant for LHH. My specialism, and it wouldn't be surprising, is resilience. That's my passion. I really love the subject, hence I'm leading with this afternoon, and leadership development, which is, of course, attaches to the need for resilience. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into the session. Okay, thanks, team. Let's get on. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the title here. The VUCA world to the BANI world. The VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex. This term arose sort of post-Cold War, 1990s, and it was during this time that the Berlin Wall fell, and it came actually from the US Army War College, and they wanted to use a phrase to characterize how their operating environment had changed so much since that time in the Cold War, where it was East versus West. It was all very, very straightforward. So they said, actually, we're not in that operating environment anymore. We're in a VUCA world. This term became really, really cemented, no surprising, after 9/11, and it became a sort of common parlance. Militaries are working in this VUCA environment. Now, interesting, the business world went, hang on, just a minute. You can't just own this term VUCA. We also operate in this environment as well, especially with huge technological advancements that occurred and the advent and the spread of the internet. So we had this term VUCA. However, that really post-COVID, although it's interesting to note, actually, Jermaine Cascio, who actually coined the phrase, actually thought of it in 2018, but he really crystallized his thinking post-COVID. That the post-pandemic created this scenario that made VUCA seem an insufficient descriptor. And he said, I've got a better word for it now, BANI, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. So Cascio, he was an anthropologist, author, and a futurist. And he said, look, after the pandemic, yeah, I think my thinking's spot on here. We're in a BANI situation. What is BANI all about? I think the most important thing to say about the difference between VUCA and BANI is VUCA is very systemic. VUCA is all about those external factors, but BANI really speaks to the human experience of working and living in a complex world. And he contended, actually, yeah, we are dealing here with a brittle environment. We are getting people that are anxious. This is non-linear and incomprehensible. So brittle, let's start with that. So it's not just about volatility anymore. It's about sudden and unforeseen shock to, or even a destruction of what was once seen as a seemingly stable system. And that leads on to a sort of a global ripple effect, which we absolutely have seen. With increasing brittleness, of course, the world is becoming increasingly terrifying, leading to a feeling of, well, powerlessness, helplessness, making people sort of rigid with fear to respond to this. Anxiety being fueled also clearly by misinformation and fake news being spread online as well. So we've got this brittleness and anxiety going on, and then we've got this non-linear world. So we've got cause and effect doesn't work anymore. These things are completely uncoupled or disproportionate. So even a minor thing has unfathomable and really quite complex consequences as a result of this that aren't detected till much later on down the line. So it becomes really difficult to deduce causes from what's going on. This is just incomprehensible to me. So the human mind is no longer able to grasp the complexity of the information and occurrences in its entirety, and everything influences everything else on various levels. Let's move that on, because actually, well, yeah, okay, well, this all seems quite depressing. Should we just go home now? Well, look, how do we respond to this BANI world? And Jemay goes on and says, look, how do we live in this sort of brittle, fear-triggering, non-linear, incomprehensible scenario, or the systems around us? He said, we need what's called RAT, resilience. We need attention. We need adaptability, and we need to get transparency. Say a little bit more about those. So if we're going to navigate this world, we need some resilience. Well, of course. So in contrast to quite fragile foundations, a resilient one is not only able to withstand external pressure, but it can bounce back up to its original state more quickly. So porous, outdated, inflexible systems simply break down. And if organizations possess a high level organizational resilience, and of course, they can overcome those challenges. And the really important point is, of course, organizations are made up of people. So we are talking about people returning back to their original state as well. So this isn't just about the organizations, it's the people within them. We are anxious, so we need to pay attention. So what's this talking about? Misinformation, exaggerations, pseudoscience, fake news, driving fear within today's world. So we need to pay really close attention to what we're listening to and what we then spread and talk about ourselves. We need to meet this anxiety with a sort of new degree of self-awareness and clarity. And we'll talk a little bit about how we do that with the coaching in a moment. We need to be adaptable. So we need to adapt to those different situations and think and act accordingly. We are really dependent on adaptability to function in a non-linear world. So the best strategy, let's adapt. Rigid plans cling to a particular outcome. Flexibility allows you, no matter what, to be able to respond and get a decent outcome at the end of it. And then there's this thing about transparency and the incomprehensible. So an effective remedy for incomprehensible behavior. When little is comprehensible, well, we know what happens. We've got effects on our health, our satisfaction, and our readiness to actually do something, because I just don't understand it. I don't know what to do. So we need a sensible functioning knowledge management system in companies, but also in our private life as well. So we need sensible filters to process the information that's coming on. And let's be frank, we all overeat at the information buffet. We have so much information coming at us. We need to be able to have that transparency to make those good decisions. So, okay, well, what's the downstream impact of this? Well, it's burnout, and that's the other part of this title this afternoon. Burnout, a state of complete mental, physical, and emotional exhaustion driven by a chronic imbalance between the job demand and those job resources. And if you're experiencing burnout, you normally notice a difficulty to engage in activities you normally find quite meaningful. So you no longer care about things that are important to you. So we've got extreme tiredness, mental distancing, inability to regulate cognitive and emotional processes, and reduced professional effectiveness. We like to call this the great exhaustion as a result of all of this. This is the downstream effects of big financial effect here. 322 billion in lost revenue, lost days of working. For the UK alone, it's at 52 billion. Our Adecco research from 2022, it was over 25 countries, pointed to 50% of people either being burnt out or nearly burnt out. It's no surprise, of course, if we sort of move that along, that obviously attrition rate is increased 2 to 3 times. And where's HR spending their time? It's dealing with these issues as well. Okay, well, look, I've said quite a bit. And I think I've set the scene. So let's hear from you. That's why you're here this afternoon. We've got a couple of polls for you. First poll here, managing burnout in a BANI world poll. To what extent is BANI affecting your organization? How are you feeling this? I'm really, really, really excited to sort of see some of your answers around this. So 1, it doesn't really affect that much, I don't think. Or 10, actually, yeah, we're feeling some of this. So let's just have a look at what comes in on this one. Okay, so, and I'll just get our fantastic producer Agne, who's supporting us this afternoon. She'll share the results in a moment. Just give it up to the sort of minute if you choose to vote. That'll be quite interesting. Some quite high figures here. 26% up at 7 and 8. Okay, Greg, for purposes of time, could we just share those results, please? Okay. So what have we got? Let's just have a look at that. Yeah. So most of you put it at certainly at 7, at 31%, but 8 at 9, and 3% of those dialing in at 9. So 7 or 8, yeah. Interesting to see. Actually, you know, there's a small proportion there at 2 and 4 as well. So.
And just to see in the middle of that absolutely tunes in with the Adecco data of there's 50% of you saying that, you know, burnout is either a risk right now or it's already upon you. And you're tuning in exactly in that way. So much of the data is really aligning around this subject. So back to you, Ed.
No, thanks very much, Lakshmi. I'll share that. Sorry, you didn't see the result there. I was supposed to share it. My apologies. Let's do the other one, and let's do better next time, as they say. So to what extent does BANI drive the risk of burnout in your view? You don't see it yourself? 1, not at all, or actually 10, yes, to a great extent. I think this brittle, anxious, non-linear, it's driving the risk of an incomprehensible is driving the risk of burnout for you. Okay, and again, I'll give it up to a minute on that. Once you've voted, if you wouldn't mind just indulging, so we can start this dialogue with you. What's your reasoning around your vote? Be quite just interesting, just to sort of test the water now with a little bit in the chat function. So, what reason did you say? Actually, Ed, it's an 8 for me. What's caused you to vote in that manner? So. If you could throw that into the chat as well, it'd be interesting to see some of the phrases and comments that are going to come out from that. Yeah, you've definitely got Okay, that's a minute on that. Let's just thank you. So the highest was 8 at 30%. Thank you. And if you, oh no, I'm just going to go now and see if I can have a look at the chat. What has caught, based on those sort of results that actually 30% gave you an 8, and there was a cluster 8, 7, and 9. What caused you to vote that? What is it that you're seeing that's saying, yeah, we see that, BANI? Katrina, thank you very much for that. Increasing issues here, dealing more with mental health issues. Yeah, mental and physical health. Seeing more and more of that going on. Thank you. Thanks for engaging there. Appreciate that.
And it's interesting who hears that in an organization, isn't it, Ed?
Absolutely.
Because here Katrina is saying it's ER, sometimes it's HR, but actually sometimes it's not
it's
at
ER.
all, and
yeah.
it's sort of sidelined off, and it may be held within a local team or local managerial, or it could be EAP, your EAP
Absolutely.
provider who actually understands more of what's going on in this field, and of course that's at the acute end, you know, when it's a problem already. So
interesting theme here as well, Kira. Thank you. Katrina, also concerns on financial health, threat of insolvency, redundancy, making ends meet, cost of living crisis, all, you know, a lot of uncertainty and concern there. So yeah, absolutely. So the financial element, tighter resources, more responsibility put on teams. Yeah, resources, absolutely, extremely tight. It's difficult time.
There's a thing coming through for me there about that inability to plan career journey and tighter resources. It feels like there's constraints being put on people, which obviously puts extra stress on people as well.
Absolutely. So yeah, we saw, you know, quite a high score on that. So I can see that you're feeling this, but look, fear not. That's why we're here this afternoon. There's plenty that we can do to mitigate some of this, and let's switch our attention now to that. I'm just showing you there some work by fantastic, the Josh Bershon company. It's a consultancy that provides a range of advisory services to help today's workforce. They did some research in 21 and 22 around organizational health, and they conducted this over a year. And this was about leaders having an intense focus on a sort of holistic scale around physical and mental well-being, work-life balance, actionable feedback, and preventing professional burnout. And their definitive guide, which this is drawn from, to a healthy organization, really puts an emphasis on taking a wider holistic approach, this enterprise-wide. So you can see here some of the great business outcomes and people outcomes here from adopting this, in inverted commas, healthy organization. So it's improving financial performance, greater employee engagement, retention, an increase in customer satisfaction and loyalty. What is always interesting in this, because clearly as a consultant, people are always saying, what about the business case, Ed? But the company was contending actually for every £1 spent, the return was £5 on this healthy organization business case. So really strong, compelling business case around doing this and taking a broader view. I'll come back to a little bit on this later on. Some of the big Adecco research that we did last year came out with 3 takeaways, and I'm going to hand over to Jenny in a moment to sort of take this forward, and certainly over that final third point. And these were the 3 takeaways that they concluded that's really important to think about here. One was about building a healthy high-performance culture, which speaks very much to that Josh Bershon work there. This means good organizational support, encouraging workers to actually take their full annual leave. Look, I notice, you know, you've still got 8 days outstanding. You need to take those. You need your rest. You need a break too. Creating appropriate organizational culture. So that's for leaders to build trust and psychological safety with their team. Allowing sick leave where there is mental health issues, were they seen as the sort of top 3 company measure that should be in place to support workers' well-being. Coupled to this, and Claire's going to speak to this point in a moment, was about individual and group coaching and how powerful that can be as an enabler. So managers and workers alike needing to be coached, initiate conversations around mental health and well-being, and really helping leaders and workers verbalize and make sense of what's going on for them. So preventing that quiet quitting, and a term that I came across the other day, it's called the bare minimum Mondays, which sits alongside quiet quitting. And the last one, which is where we're going to start thinking about some of Jenny's research here, is about being data-led. Stop guessing and look at the data. So using technology and big data for employee well-being can really help companies have real visibility about actually giving that granularity, making sure they can actually see those burnout warning indicators and raising those flags to managers and saying, actually start those conversations with your people. The last bit I'm just going to say for the time being, and then Jenny's going to take the reins, is really about how do we activate a healthy high performance culture, to Josh Bersham's research there. And this is a framework that ourselves, LHH and Resilience Dynamic are offering as a partnership here, that enables organizations both to sort of self-assess and as a result, look at the key outcomes that they're aiming for here. So to illustrate, we're looking at sort of at the beginning, as we go through these levels, trusted leadership and eliminating toxicity from the workplace are the sort of bedrocks alongside building this inclusive and safe culture. Thereafter, 3 and 4, all about creating this capability and activating all of this reality in a day-to-day in teams and across key processes, as well as talent management. We're going to revisit a little bit about this at the end, but this is our sort of stepping stones to that sort of activated high performance culture. But now I'm going to just hand over to Jenny now, and she's going to talk about adopting a sort of data-led approach that can inform key actions for you to really, really get to the heart of the matter. Jenny, thanks very much, and over to you.
Lovely. Thanks, Ed, and thanks, everybody. Interesting conversation so far. Just to land some of our framework, if you like, for this part of the session, we have been researching about resilience and well-being since 2007, actually. And just a word about that word resilience, and in conjunction with RAT, that resilience, attention, transparency, etc. When we first started, it was in our research question, it was about the idea of how do people actually recover, how do they actually manage challenge, etc. And very, very, very swiftly, we threw that kind of singular notion out that it was about bouncing back, and it became much more about adaptability. So the insights that we have from this are really showing that resilience and adaptability are in fact the same thing, and the measure of resilience is the measure of your capacity for change within an organization, within a team, within an individual. So when we are speaking about this, we see these things as hand in hand. And our research shows that there are 3 fundamental aspects to fostering resilience in a proactive way. And Ed has already talked about one, is feeling safe, feeling psychological safety. So feeling safe in yourself, feeling safe within your team, and being able to voice your opinion, voice your needs, being able to set your boundaries in a way that actually is open and clear and transparent, and you are listened to. And of course, that's very counter to that toxicity that may exist in parts of your organization or elsewhere. The second is adaptive capacity. Now, what was stunning for me when I first kicked off the research, and we've done many, many things since, it's not just me, there's a whole team of us who are researchers and practitioners involved. But what was stunning for me was this idea that actually there's about 2/3 to 1/3 of your time spent on doing versus fostering adaptive capacity. So people with the highest resilience, and that includes organizational level, put about 1/3 of their time into fostering adaptive capacity. So that might be about re-energizing, which you may describe as a well-being space, you know, about sort of energy and sleep and taking care of yourself and all the way. But actually, there's some strategic capability in here too. So this is about pacing. This is about perspective. This is about proactively looking down the line to see what's coming through. This is about sense checking. So there's a lot of sort of strategic skill involved in fostering adaptive capacity. And the last is switching it all on. And this is really the heart of team resilience. We call it the big daddy of team resilience, is being absolutely clear on your purpose. Actually having a meaning that you can draw on, that you can see the results of, that you can celebrate that you are effecting change. Having something that is really meaningful. Now, for a leadership team, this does not mean the organization's strategy or plan. This means what's your value add that you all really connect into, and that actually fosters that commitment and interest and curiosity in a persistent way. So we know resilience is about this all together. If we can go on to the next one. We also have a name in our company, the resilience dynamic, and it's for a very good reason, is because your resilience goes up and down. Now, Ed has already alluded to this, the idea of job demand versus the job resources that you have. And of course, that varies day to day. And that's the same within us, whether it's at an individual level, team level, etc., and organizational level. And this is our foremost research model, the resilience dynamic. It shows the range of resilience levels that you can have, ranging from breakdown, where there is it coincides with a clinical breakdown where somebody is rendered unresourceful because that demand has been too great for them to cope with. Right the way through to breakthrough, where people, teams, organizations are able to adapt, but maintain their persistence according to their goals. So they're really adapting, they expect to, it's a high learning capability, and where that 1/3 of their time is spent on adaptive capacity. In between is where most of us are. So there aren't so many people at that high level, but in the middle, break even is where most of the working population is. And that's either coping, and that's where demand equals capacity, or bounce back, where you've got a bit of surplus, punching through those challenges, but often there's a downside to that. And if it's too many, it feels quite unstable. Now, most of your talent might be in that bounce back. You yourself might be in bounce back. There's all sorts of things around that. It feels great at the top and it doesn't feel so good when you're absolutely shattered at the end of a challenge. And then there's this area thereafter, fragmentation. If people aren't coping, it doesn't mean to say they're broken down. Okay, so there's an in-between state, and this is actually where burnout exists. It's where people are no longer coping, where things begin to feel overwhelming, cracking up, ill health, chronic stress, all the aspects of that and the ill health that can ensue. Also included in there is depression and anxiety. So some of the mental health aspects that you may be considering in your organization may sit there. Interestingly, burnout sits there also. And of course, people try and get back from that to coping. And if they don't manage, they go back, and then you get into this kind of loop. So that gives you a flavor of our research, and we see almost everything of our results through there. The biggest message in this is that those who are in that bounce back or higher up on that range, which we call the whoosh, versus those in coping or below, need different things. They have a different capacity for change, they have different well-being needs, and you can't offer a one-size-fits-all. And that's where data really comes into the fore. So if we go on to that, we're going to show that data in comparison to demand versus capacity. Just keep that in mind, and we'll go straight for the data. Ed, we've been doing this a long time. We help organizations such as Google, we've worked with for 2-3 years, tracking this demand versus capacity alongside other factors. And we have some astounding research, okay, associated with this. So this is 2 months worth of data. When demand is higher than capacity at any level, stress shoots up. Okay, and that doesn't mean to say it's chronic stress or burnout level, but stress is already upon the system. Okay, and this sensitivity is much higher when people are at coping or below. It's an acute level of sensitivity. Those who are higher, and you can learn to be higher, at the organizational level, if you're on the bounce back or whoosh at that kind of going upward level, that stress sensitivity is far less. Okay, but across the board, you see stress going up. If we go on to the next one, keep going, and energy drops. Okay, now that's really important. That's like a combination of your physical, mental, social, you know, inspirational energy. But basically, that's a productivity piece right there. Okay, so when you're out of kilter and workload, for example, or the sense of pressure, which is also part of demand, is upon people, energy is dropping by about a third. Now, you could absolutely translate that into a drop in productivity. And we do have some data showing how that actually then impacts financial results. There's a lag in financial results, but sort of 3 to 6 months in, you'll start to see it. Okay, let's go on to the next one. So we're tracking this, we're seeing this, and we now have the capability of looking at productivity versus your well-being and engagement scores. Okay, so day to day, being able to actually spot that, know what that means, and you'll see how that translates into a team. So Ed, if we go on to the next bit. So we have a notional team here, 16 people who are actually getting in and around their own data. What does it mean for us? They've used one of the most simple self-assessment tools that we have, the Resilience Dynamic Indicator, and it's showing at an aggregate level, the 16 people all together, they're in bounce back. Pretty good, okay? Now, if you just took that as a singular measure, you'd be thinking, we're okay, we're all right, we're managing those challenges, we get a bit fatigued. Not too bad. But when you start to delve into that data, you realize that the team's range is extremely high. So there are people in here who are around fragmentation and the whoosh. And now everybody is measuring their range. Every one of these 16 is measuring a range. So each has those individual reports, but actually all together, that range is really high for the team. The other part of that is the variability between those scores, fragmentation to that middle of the whoosh, what we call that, the whoosh, that big line, the loopy line towards breakthrough. That variability is going up and down a lot. There are only 3 ranges, low, medium, and high, and this means that the team feels quite unstable. Now, those results, again, very simple data. Secure areas, you've nailed it. Neutral areas are neither draining nor contributing to your resilience. So they're your low-hanging opportunities, really. And the watch areas are problem. So you see here, this team is tired and it's not maintaining its own boundaries. That's probable that they're taking on too much workload. They're actually, because they're so tired, they're just saying yes to people. And that is a normal stress reaction. What might they do about that? Well, as a team leader, you might get in or around, for example, how could the team feel more grounded day to day? Are there things that you could do in process terms on a week by week basis that just help the team feel more clear, more grounded, you know, more secure? So here we're talking about fundamental psychological safe, okay? You might also attack some of that aspects about saying no. You know, what can we easily say no to? Where are our priorities? So you see here, this kind of data is shifting things from well-being right through to the business. Now, this is addressing the kind of things that McKinsey is talking about. Okay, it's workload, it's leadership, it's openness, it's inclusivity, it's psychological safety. So when you get that data, and we work with teams all the time on this, they kind of go, right, we're going to do that, and then they just start. It's easy, it's tangible, they can go on with it. So this boils down to what can we do? And it really places agency, you know, within the individual or the team. If we go to the next slide, and it's my last one to show you, is this is an example of the 16 team members actually tracking their own resilience according to that demand and capacity. And what's really exciting is the idea of being able to offer the red flags that Ed was talking about. So proactively looking forward to know whether you're in the right zone or not. You can imagine this as a planning tool if you've got a big change program coming up or extra workloads. This chart is showing you that this team, where they're spending most of their time. So, you know, in the sweet spot demand capacity, about 1/3 of their time is okay, but 16% is in the danger zone. Right? When you get to sleep, the consequences of that are sleep is not good at all, well-being is not good, and contentedness is going down. So you can see the consequences of demand capacity being out of kilter here, and operating on that day to day, you can hone in on the hotspots and actually take action accordingly. So the data places you in a position of real clarity and agency, and it really just demystifies a tremendous amount of this complex world for people. So I hope that's given you an insight. It is just a little bypass through, and I would love to leave you with a question before we go into Claire's session on about coaching. If we just go to the next slide, we've got a question for you, and we would really love to hear your views. What situations in your organization are you seeing that are related to burnout that you'd really want to just start to address?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Yeah, let's see sort of things are going on within the cadre that's joined this afternoon. What's going on around burnout that you really need to sort out. We'll see what sort of comes in on that chat there. If you want to just throw a couple of things in there, we will see.
And you may just be sitting there pondering all of what we're talking about, from BANI to RAT to data, and that's okay too.
Okay, building resilience and greater efficiencies on ways of working, which really speaks to that tighter resources, that, you know, there's never going to be endless resources. What could we do about that? And building that, to my point about that, organizations need to be resilient. The people within it need to be resilient.
What's interesting about that, Katrina, also is that if people are suffering from stress, we know that there are two predominant stress reactions. The first is about 40% of people will actually start to procrastinate, and that drives inefficiency. And the other part will be short-termists. And so you've got tension arising and factions arising, but also poor decision making as a result of that. So that actually builds inefficiency if stress is actually hijacking your organization. So, you know, one way to tackle that is to actually go at resilience rather than to just, you know, increase, review pathways or processes or whatever.
That's an interesting one about equal workload and the DECO research about, are you having conversations with your managers about prioritization, and, you know, are you getting all the priorities and others aren't? And an equal distribution, that's quite go priorities. Some not working hard enough, and the dissatisfaction and the lack of contentedness that drives when people say, well, you know, I'm working till midnight, I don't see them doing anything. You think about my niece, actually, is just trying to be worked to oblivion. So boundary setting as well, really interesting around that, about when is enough, and especially with the hybrid and working from home and all these elements here that come into it. So the blurring between you're always on, and therefore that's starting to affect, you know, your ability to recover. Because you're always thinking about work. And, you know, someone said to me, look, you've got to look at your brain like a CPU. You can't just keep the computer on all the time. You've got to stop, rest it, switch it off for a while, and do other things as well. Okay, well, thank you for those comments there. Just for purposes certainly of time, I want to bring Claire into the conversation around coaching and group coaching and its efficacy around this whole subject. So, Claire, over to you. I'll move the slides on if you wish.
Lovely, thank you, Ed. Yes, so I thought I would start by talking a little bit about what group coaching actually is. So the forms and structures of group coaching can differ. So you might have heard of terms like action learning sets, peer accountability sessions, peer forums, and communities of practice. They're all variations on this theme, and the groups might vary in how they work and what they're focusing or working on, but they do have some fundamental things in common. So they tend to be small groups, meeting regularly for thoughtful conversations about work. The individuals that make them up, they are aiming to deepen their own learning, and they've got commitment to deepen the learning of their group members as well. These groups have a defined structure, and crucially, they're a confidential, safe space for change to happen through meaningful conversations. So I thought I'd bring in an example to help this bring to life for you this afternoon. So I want to talk about a large higher education organisation. And if you can cast your minds back to the start of lockdown. So this project that I'm going to talk about was driven by the need for managers to effectively manage performance of the student-facing teams so that the impact on student was minimised as much as possible. So I brought managers together to talk about how to manage performance in this new situation. We're all mostly working from home with those new stresses and strains placed on the teams. And the group was started really to harness the collective intelligence, very much with a knowledge and performance angle in my mind. So to answer, how do we do this now? How do we share learning and ideas? And that was based on the work of Woolley et al. Research around the collective intelligence, particularly of small groups, being better than average or maximum individual intelligence. Great, get that together and share and form ideas that we can do greater in a group than we can do on our own. But surprisingly quickly, it turned out that the need was greater than that of sharing learning and ideas. Managers were lonely. More than ever, they felt isolated from their teams, of whom they were asking a lot. So where did they find their community when the bonds with their team in some cases were feeling the pressure and they were feeling strained? So how did they find the resilience and strength to make some tough decisions, sometimes without clear right or wrong answers? And there was an interesting common reaction from the participants. I feel better because I'm not on my own. So I want to be clear that this wasn't set up with the intention of supporting resilience. It was about a very real organisational and developmental challenge. And actually, it was the skill of the group coach, me in this instance, in creating and holding this safe conversational space that transformed it into a chat that could happen organically, into something deeper and more transformational. And this is common in group coaching when the coach intentionally sets the psychological safety of the group to allow that honesty, vulnerability, and those emotions to emerge. And we commonly see members build camaraderie and form connections that help them feel safe, to use Jenny's term, grounded and capable in that volatile and uncertain world that we've been talking about. And the support that they receive in these forums can sustain people through their toughest professional and sometimes personal challenges. So reflecting on this experience, I like to think of it through the lens of Dietrich and Ryan's self-determination theory. And it brings some light on what was happening and how it links to our topic of today, burnout. So according to Dietrich and Ryan and self-determination theory, we have 3 basic psychological needs, and we can see that playing out in group coaching. So autonomy, that's enabling that agency of individuals in these groups. Competence, people feeling that they have the resources and the ability to do things. And finally, relatedness, forming connections to something bigger than ourselves. So research has shown that when these needs are met, they act to counteract the effects of the job demands that we've been referring to. If you like, they increase the job resources. So they foster both immediate well-being and strengthen inner resources, contributing to that subsequent resilience. So when these elements are present in group coaching, as I've talked about, it's a very powerful way of supporting resilience. If you could move to the next slide, Ed, for me. So why is this important? So a couple more stats for you. I know we've gone through a lot today, but a couple more. So in 2021, the Harvard Business Review reported that 40% of us are feeling more isolated at work. 2022, Gallup polled that 60% of us are feeling emotionally detached from our work. And as a society, we are suffering from a lack of connection. Many people are missing their village, which has a devastating effect for organisations ranging from wellbeing concerns, the lack of engagement, absence, quiet quitting, minimal work Mondays. And in addition, the complexities that in our BANI environment that Ed talked about, they require new agile thinking and approaches to evolve in this context. So here at LHH, we view group coaching as imperative to support organisations, executives, leaders and individuals in moving towards interconnected, purpose-led villages. Now, if you can move to the next slide. I'm not going to go through all of these numbers. I just wanted to pay attention to that first very powerful statistic on the left-hand side. So 99% of respondents who received LHH group coaching recommended it to help them solve their daily challenges. And I believe that that picture that I've described about with all of that knowledge and that connectedness is part of that picture and why it works so well. Okay, thank you. But back over to you.
Thanks very much, Claire. Powerful stuff, group coaching. Over to you. Opportunity to ask, maybe just throw in a couple of questions around, well, what do you now have? Adopting a data-led approach, your organisational readiness, an opportunity for us to have a little bit of a Q&A. You can pop those into the Q&A function there, or you can throw them into the chat. I'm monitoring both of them here. And let's hear some of your questions. Got a few minutes before I'll draw some of the strands together. So over to you. Any questions from attendees here this afternoon? Thank you.
All comments and observations would be really great to hear from you as well. So any thoughts and reflections on the content that we've shared this afternoon?
Okay. Okay, Katrina, yeah, fantastic. Thank you. What solutions would you have for burnout at different levels in an organization? That's just an interesting question there. About what I'm taking from that is, you know, do you need to think about the C-suite? Interesting research saying C-suite tends to be one of those ones that's actually been ignored, and that 70%, this is some Hogan research, are actually thinking of quitting themselves due to stress levels, which is quite a terrifying thought. In terms of what we do at LHH, and certainly in terms of we would nuance our approach towards the leadership team and their particular development around burnout and helping develop their own resilience. So we would have slightly more nuanced conversations with them about themselves and also how they can develop their own people. So we tend to have a number of different questionnaires and so on to raise their awareness of their own resilience based on our own model. And then from there, we would say, well, okay, what's your thinking around that? Jenny, what's your experience been around different solutions for different levels?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ed and Katrina, for your question. This is partly dependent upon the context that you're operating in and your culture already. Google, for example, use both the dashboard that we've got where we've got the data, but also a way, we call it check-in, check-out, of enabling cross-communication and up and down communication in a group coaching style way, but doing it for themselves through a process called check-in, check-out. And that we found was extraordinary, actually. It was so simple, and I think that's necessary in this very, very busy, over busy world, where people were able to listen better, help one another understand their own resilience better and more quickly, so that attention to themselves, and also support one another. So group group culture, group coaching, doing it for yourselves, finding ways in which it becomes the norm, I would say is really powerful across the organisation. I think the other part of this, Ed and Claire, you may speak to this, is there's the leadership, which absolutely has to kind of grasp
Yeah.
this, but there's the team leader, there's the managerial role, and they often are at the crux of having to foster today's world as well as embrace the change and implement the changes that are needed in order to move forward. So they're under the cosh a lot. So any kind of focus that you could put on fostering resilience at the managerial level will in itself absolutely make a change to everybody's burnout levels. So they're my two pennies worth in that one.
And one of the things that research shows is that the impact of a manager's own engagement, it rolls downhill, as we like to say. So a manager is highly engaged and feeling resilient themselves, then even without them consciously doing interventions or looking after resilience, it does impact the well-being and engagement of their teams. And Jenny, I was also, there was a follow-up question about what do you mean by check-in and check-out, and how does that work?
Yeah, so it's a process that we've created. It's been part of our sort of large program rollout, and now we've created it separately. It is part and parcel of how we're thinking about that level 1, 2, 3, 4 for you. And that second level of building psychological safety across the organisation, we've created a process actually based on this metaphor of resilience called the Resilience River, that equips people, and they practice this through a very kind of mini little program of being able to check in and check out with one another. So the idea is to power up into your day or into a meeting or into a project, and then being able to reset going out. So checking out is often about, this is what's happened to me in the day, this is what I need to deal with, this is how I'm going to do it, and this is how I'm going to set up the boundaries for going away at night. So that check-in, check-out process, we can send you on details for that, Katrina. It's, you know, it will be part of how the resilience dynamic and LHH work together. So I hope it's explained a little bit, but go simple, go straightforward, and put it in the hands of the actual people who need it. That's kind of the message of check-in, check-out. So yeah, we'll send that on to you.
It's a great question. And actually, it just occurred to me when we're talking about starting with self. And Katrina, I'll come back to that answer as we close out, because we've developed something directly for leaders to help with their own sort of ability to regenerate and self-generate and draw on their own energy to have that to combat burnout. And I'll mention that at the very end. I think there's time probably for one more question. I did get sent one here, actually. Claire and Jenny, what specifically in your experience undermines sort of mental health and is causing this burnout? What's actually causing that? Jenny, over to you first.
I mean, I can speak to the data. So there are two primary causes that are cited in all aspects of every bit of data that we have ever seen around this. And the first one is a toxic culture.
Yeah.
And then specifically what creates burnout as a consequence of that is an imbalance in workload demand versus capacity. Yeah. It's literally, and in fact, we see a disconnect. McKinsey talked about it. Leaders think that everything is much better than the workforce do. There is a real disconnect, and there's a blind spot that leadership can have, that because they're perceiving themselves as being more optimistic, etc., that things are improving, getting better, but actually it's going the other way in the workforce, and they're not seeing that. So that's what the data says. Claire, what would you say?
And I was reflecting on that sense of isolation. So this isn't data-led, it's something that I'm very interested in reading about at the moment, about the UK government saying about loneliness being almost at epidemic levels, and that it is the responsibility of everyone in society to play their part in counteracting loneliness. So for me, that, again, the importance of connections and making time for connections and doing it with purpose. So when we talk about work friendships, for example, we don't mean like a friend who we go to the park with or down the pub with, but what we mean is an intentional relationship that we set up with effort and time, positivity and an energy around it, in order to make connections for our own sake, but also for the people around us, is part of our social responsibility, I think. And yeah, that's my thought.
Yeah, that really chimes with some of the McKinsey recent research around. They say the ones are always on call, unfair treatment, unreasonable workload, to the point you make there, low autonomy, and a lack of that social support. To your final point there, Claire. Thank you. Thank you for your, Katrina. Certainly, thank you for your question there. I'm just going to go back onto the slides. I've got a couple of sort of final comments to make as we draw to it. Claire, can you see the slides? Okay.
Yes, thank you. Perfect.
Okay. So what can we activate to mitigate for this burnout? How can we dampen down those fires? I've shown you this before. There's no doubt about it that you know, a reminder that we work in a tough old world. It's a complex world. It's a difficult world, and we need resilience, attention, adaptability, and transparency. Our solution, our co-solution between ourselves, our partner solution between sales and resilience dynamic, we can help activate solutions towards this, towards mitigating for burnout, bespoke targeted leadership development interventions that can go to the root of that toxic workplace behavior, augmented, of course, by the group coaching that Claire alluded to as well. All this moving towards the level 4, a really activated high performance culture. Crucially, with the work the resilience dynamic can do, of course, is we can look under the behavioral bonnet and see what the data is actually showing us before we start as well. As I said before, one size certainly doesn't fit all. Jenny, anything just to add on that?
I think the only thing I would say is this can feel a big thing. And actually, there are a couple of straightforward, I don't mean easy, but straightforward things that you can do to get going. And I think that's to get hold of, and to always be tuning in on that data to see where are we now, where are we now. So the leadership and psychological safety are definitely aspects that I would hone in on. But if you're already listening to this or watching this and you're already further on, then you might be ready to actually start embedding that data capability or your wellbeing policies, etc., in there, and fully activating with a coaching culture inside, etc. So depending upon where you sit right now is, you know, just go one step and it will already improve your chances.
Thanks, Jenny. And to my original point that Katrina was mentioning, what do we offer for leaders here? We've got a program called the Regenerative Self-Leadership, because we see that it's market-led. We're seeing data, we're seeing a requirement for this about focusing on an individual adaptive capacity to future-proof self here. Targeted at leaders, we think mid to senior level, it seems to be where we're getting the feedback is where it's really, really required about building an adaptive mindset, working on limiting beliefs, building this resilient, agile approach to things, so that actually we can draw on our personal strengths and energies to identify and change the behaviors we need to in the moment that's required to adapt to whatever that new normal is. We're looking at 3 working sessions here with field experiments in the background, and of course augmented and supplemented by group coaching, because we see that as so utterly powerful. Thank you. So the open question, and thank you so much for your time this afternoon, is what will you do differently as a result of this session? Hopefully we've given you some real food for thought here. Toxic workplace behavior is the biggest predictor of burnout. The research is all over that. So wellness programs, you can't yoga your way out of this, as to quote McKinsey. It's a systemic, informed, data-led solution to this. Building an adaptive capacity, the resilient self-leadership, really, really important. We see that as absolutely vital to building that resilience. And group coaching, we've talked in some detail there. Thank you for your time there, Claire, this afternoon on that. If you want to combat burnout, I think it starts with supporting that leadership cadre, to Katrina's fantastic question there. Our details will be on the slide deck that obviously we'll go through there, but also there'll be some contact details on the data paper as well if you want to learn more from what you've thought about this afternoon. It just remains for me to say thank you very much, Claire, for your inputs this afternoon. Really appreciated the conversations there, and Jenny as well. And thank you to you for your time, and I hope you found that informative discussion on burnout in a BANI world. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.